Hi again. So let's proceed to the next session. And I'm pleased to introduce Timea Andrea Lelik. She's an art historian, writer, lecturer, and curator based in Amsterdam. She has extensively written, lectured, and published in the international field of modern and contemporary art. Her research includes portraiture, surrealism, feminist art, identity politics, and art philosophy. As a freelance curator, she organized several exhibitions in the Netherlands and abroad. In her talk, Timea will discuss the relationship between performance and photography in the work of an American artist. Thank you, Timea.
Thank you, Paolo, for the introduction. And hello all, very nice to be here in person with you. Very happy we're able to be back to in-person presentations. So today I will be talking about the work of the multimedia artist Lynn Hershman-Leeson, with whom I have been collaborating since 2017 on different texts, exhibitions, interviews, and research. She is known today for her technologically informed work, but when she began her career, she was working in more traditional media, such as painting and drawing, which soon started to incorporate performance, moving image, collage, text-based work, site-specific interventions, later new media, digital technologies, interactive net-based works, making her one of the first truly multidisciplinary artists. Therefore, she cannot be called a signature artist, known for one specific type of work, but she's known for one particular performance, which I will be discussing today. So, for this talk, I chose to focus on Lynn Hershman-Leeson as the performer and photographer, as these two media form an integral part of her oeuvre and challenge each other throughout the years, functioning in more than one way at a time, in a type of continuous exchange, which is still relevant for her practice today. Today, I will discuss her arguably most famous work or most famous performance, which is the becoming of the fictional character of Roberta Brightmore. This is a unique performance in art history, and more about how it's unique in a minute, where the artist doesn't directly perform for a public, but performs with the unknowing public. In this context, photography acquires a very important role, as it is the sole manner to naturally document the performance, but more importantly, to prove the existence of this fictional character. Yet photography, in this case, does more than that. It goes beyond fixing an identity and performance in time and history. Photography also acts as one of the elements which enables a continuous reenactment of the performance. Therefore, in the coming presentation, I investigate what is the ongoing relationship between performance and photography in Lynn Hershman-Leeson's enacting of Roberta Brightmore, and consequently pose the question of how does the encounter between performance and photography redefine our relationship with reality and representation, document and fiction, in this body of work. So in this presentation, I will go through three main themes. First, I will discuss the relationship between performance and photographic documentation, also try to see what that actually means. In the second part, we will be looking at what performative photography means in this specific work. And three, we'll be looking at how the performance actually metamorphoses back into photography and potentially back to life. But before I actually get to these theoretical points, I want to tell you more about this performance. So the fictional character of Roberta Brightmore was part of what Lynn called a private performance that roughly lasted from 74 to 78. She was an imaginary persona created from accumulated stereotypical data, Roberta becoming a real-life person with her own clothing, driver's license, checking account, credit card, unique gestures, handwriting, and body language. She came into existence when she arrived in San Francisco on a Greyhound bus and checked into a Dante hotel. What subsequently followed was an ingeniously simulated real-life experience where Roberta placed ads in newspapers to find roommates, went on dates, and even started seeing a therapist. After 3 years of existence and a series of negative experiences, Roberta multiplied herself with 3 other people besides Lynn Hershman Reason, regularly performing as the character. Christine Stiles, Michelle Larson, and Helen Danberg all wore the same identical costume as Hershman Leeson, and each of them had 2 different home addresses and 2 jobs, one for Roberta and one for themselves. These multiples embodied and enacted Roberta, just as Hershman Leeson did, with their actions and encounters with people recorded in photographs and audio tapes. After 1 year of accumulated negative experience from all these multiples, the performance ended with Roberta being exorcised in Lucretia Borgia's crypt, leaving behind sufficient credible proof of her factual existence. So, important to note, by the end of this performance, Roberta Brightmore actually had a public institutionalized identity separate from her creator. She had financial independence through a checking account, credit card, employment application, signing a lease. She had a medical identity through dental records and by seeing a therapist. She also had a visual and social identity with the specific silver wig and polka dot outfit that she'd be wearing on all social occasions. So let me take you through how this happened. So you see here in the image, on the left-hand side, you have Lynn. This is still her. You see here her hair, but she already has this Roberta costume. That's the silver wig in her hand. She puts it on, and here you see Roberta glancing herself in the mirror. She was released in San Francisco in '74. She came with a Greyhound bus, you see there in the back, with all her life savings to San Francisco. That was $1,800. And as a fresh divorcee, she was now supposed to find a new life for herself. Of course, she needed to prove who she is. So you see there a driver's license. So yes, in the '70s, it was possible for people to create a completely invented persona. There's her ID on the right-hand side. Left-hand side, you also see the checking account. And there she is, interacting with the unknown public. On the left-hand side, you see her going out, making friends, trying to find a roommate. On the right-hand side, of course, she's a divorcee, lonely woman. She is also going on dates. But unfortunately, all of this is not exactly as easy as it seems. So before too long, Roberta lands in therapy sessions where she actually develops an own body language. And you see here her body chart. So when this becomes way too much for Lynn to keep taking on, she decides, and you see the fun part starts here, the 2 women, if you look left and right, you'll see there's a slight difference. It's the same outfit, but they look different. And that is because on the left, you have Lynn performing Roberta at the gallery opening in '76. On the right-hand side, you have Christine Stiles. So they were going out to in the same artistic circle, same type of opening. So imagine the people who saw Roberta, I mean, you can recognize her with this polka dress, right? So you see her one day, 5'2" or 170. Next day, she's 185. So it was quite an interesting performance for the people. But when this became too much, performing Roberta for Lynn Hershman Leeson, but also the multiples, she wasn't meant to die, but rather to be exorcised and leave the door open for an eventual comeback. Officially, the performance ended in '78 at Palazzo dei Diamanti in Ferrara, Italy, with an exorcism ritual that took place in the crypt of Lucretia Borgia. During this exorcism, Brightmore was transformed through the elements of fire, water, and air, where she transmuted and evaporated into the Water Women series, which you see an example on your right-hand side. For more than 30 years, this ongoing series of work made in various media, ranging from vintage collage to digital prints, carries Roberta's legacy and continues Hershman Leeson's investigation of transformation and transcendence from a solid state in a liquid one, and eventually back to solidity, all in a performative manner. So what is the relationship between this performance and the photographic documentation that exists of it? Though performances are often intended to experience live in real time, with photography playing an ancillary function in recording them, photographs also function as independent, expressive pictures, often staged in the absence of a public audience. At the center of these pictures is, of course, the performance, the artist posing or enacting an action conceived for the photographic lens. The resulting images are considered photographic documentation of the performance without giving a clear definition of what is documentary photography actually. The photographer Walter Evans actually explained this, and I quote, he says, "When you say documentary, you have to have a sophisticated ear to receive that word. It should be documentary style, because documentary is police photography of a scene and murder. That's a real document. Therefore, art is never a document, but it can adopt that style. I do it. I'm called a documentary photographer, but that presupposes quite a subtle knowledge of that distinction," end quote. Lynn nevertheless plays with this fine line between these two types of photographic records when documenting Roberta Brightmore, as she diligently crosses between the two through the entire performance. Many of the Roberta photographs are evidentiary. They're pictures of her psychotherapy sessions, her meeting with potential roommates, and blind dates. These images are unaltered photographically, even though they depict staged events. Hirschman's incorporation of responses within the Roberta Brightmore photographic works was a significant innovation. By pairing the unaltered photograph with textual counterparts, including letters from would-be suitors and transcripts of Roberta's conversation, Hirschman-Neeson added another layer of documentation to the manipulated scene. Roberta's body language chart, the one you see here on the screen, collects a series of images from her psychotherapy session and provide analytical commentary on her self-presentation. These images document the response of others to Roberta as a character, but they also stage the ambiguity underlying documentary photography. The camera sees what is put before it, true or not. So Roberta seems real because of these documents. From Susan Sontag's perspective, photos are neither reliable narrators nor trustworthy documentations of specific places and times. Instead, they are naturally open to considerable interpretation because the viewer does not have a comprehensive idea of what is happening in the photo location or with the subject of the photo during the picture-taking process. Sontag warns in her opening essay from her famous work on photography, cautioning against the 21st century reliance on photographic images as true depictions of people and events. She almost cautions the reader against placing too much trust in photos. Ultimately, her argument goes, there's much more happening behind the scenes in any photo that the viewer can be privy to, as well as to sometimes questionable intentions of the photographer, which we don't entirely know, exactly as in Roberta Brightmore's case. But Susan Sontag goes on to say in her final essay of the book, to posit another theory. She wonders whether photographs and reality are in fact the same thing. If they're not the same thing, they must be intimately connected because some amount of reality is always captured in a visual image. In this way, photography is an act of acquisition, not just interpretation or documentation. It is a mode of acquiring information, memories, and events, linking past from the photo with the present of the moment. That would mean that photos are not only relics or placeholder of memories, they offer a new way of dealing with the present. When you photograph something, it becomes a part of certain knowledge system adapted to schemes of classification and storage, starting from family photographs up to police, political, and scientific usage. Photography, other words, is a form of supervision, which again is exactly what was happening in these photos on one hand. The photographer hired to follow her around was not only meant to record and document the performance, but was supposed to surveil her during her interactions with the real world, as these were completely unscripted and oftentimes proved to actually be dangerous. She had been made unwanted advances by many of the blind dates, and was even recruited to become part of a prostitution circle. Dangerous encounters, which she dared to take on because she knew that she had a private eye following her who could intervene in case there was actual danger. Therefore, imagery that's used by police, for instance, to classify individuals in a manner of killing the subjectivity works in a reversed manner in Hirschman's works. Documentary, as well as surveillance photography, provide her an authentic institutionalized proof of existence, but also save her fictionalized persona. So once Lynn Hirschman Leeson established a factual identity of the character, there remained, of course, the case of documenting the performance itself and what performative photography means in this case. As historically, the limitations and special nature of photography were a central concern when documenting performance, many artists have chosen to approach photography by making it integral to the piece. This led to the genre of performative photography, which in a traditional sense borrows from the second aspect of photography implied by Susan Sontag, that new way of dealing with the present. A widely accepted definition of performativity comes from J.L. Austin's speak check theory, which asserts that performatives are expressions that by themselves produce an action, such as, I declare you husband and wife. Therefore, when we say that photography is performative, we do not necessarily mean that it performs, but rather that it does. That is, that it enacts something at the moment that we are viewing it. Additionally, we assert that if anything is performative, it derives from a language construction, a speaking act. We cannot say that the photograph is performative solely because we have documented or utilized it with a performative action. We also have to investigate the photograph's performativity as a visual citation that produces something itself between itself and the audience in the shared temporal space. But the important thing to emphasize here is the doing element of these citations. If we are to describe imagery as performative, we are talking of enacting, activating, and that as a consequence of it being viewed. Using the term performativity has an inference of a reality-producing effect, an aspect that not only enacts in our imagination, but has an effect within the physical world it inhabits. Photographs also show rather than tell. This mechanism of showing, allowing an audience to fill in the blanks themselves and come up with their own individual connection to performance, and of course, the still image. This meant that interpretation shifted depending on the Ruperta's records, just like her photographs and text, could be viewed without any predetermined sequence. This meant that interpretations shifted depending on the perspective and order of sequences. In this no hierarchy type of system, when viewing the sequences, created a different audience dynamic as well, as people were encouraged to actively reimagine her life as they were looking at the archive. The dominant presumption is that making art is active and viewing is passive. But in Lynn Hirschman Leeson's case, viewer participation challenges the theory. Roberta Brightmore's archive insists upon active choices by observers to make up her past life, but also share a call to action, not only in reimagining what her life was, but in actually becoming her at any point in time. And that is what we see in these probably most well-known photographs. This is a construction chart where you see makeup with clear instructions on how anyone, by putting up on the wig and specific makeup, can become Roberta Brightmore at any moment in time. So her performative photographs go beyond, as they create a call of action in the present moment. As Peggy Pellon puts it, Brightmore was a doer. She took action and prompted action in others. Through her construction chart, she not only invited people to reimagine her construction, but enabled them to become her. And that was happening historically. At one point, I told you there were a lot of Robertas released in the public. So in '78, the Young Museum made a call for the Roberta lookalike contest. Anyone could have come dressed up. So she did have an impact at the time. But 40 years later, it continues. This is Civic Radar, San Francisco, Yerba Buena Center of the Arts. Look what happened at the opening of the exhibition. People try to surprise Lynn, and you see all the Robertas coming to life. While there have been other artists throughout the 20th century who fabricated fictional personas, no artist before established an independent public and institutionalized identity. These characters enacted by artists such as Marcel Duchamp, Eleanor Antin, Martha Wilson, and Claude Cahun, whom we've mentioned in this conference already, were mostly theatrical, always at a safe distance from the viewers. It was only Hirschman Leeson's performance that brought performance to the real world with no script and no safety measures. Becoming and performing Roberta surpassed any other similar performance which maintained a safe distance between artist and image, but also between the artist and the public. Her work is also very often compared to Cindy Sherman and her film stills. But unlike Cindy Sherman, whose works are literally and metaphorically contained in the frame of the static photography, Roberta Brightmore's series was not tightly controlled or managed in its form or in its operation. While in Sherman's case, photography freezes a moment and a person in time to expose artificial construct of stereotypical femininity, in Lynn's photographs, everything extends beyond the borders, literally and metaphorically, not to freeze a moment in time, but on the contrary, to liberate this character from the frame and bring it into the real life. As through Roberta's construction chart, this work allows literally to escape the frame of the photo. But yet there is a third level to all of this, and that is Roberta's metamorphose back into photography and potentially also back to life. Even though Roberta Brightmore had an endless potential of multiplication beyond the original historical frame of the performance, the artist decided to bring it back into a new and ongoing set of performative photography. According to the artist, the new series of The Water Women investigates bodies of water that reflect invisibility, evaporation, and survival, and were conceived as metaphors of Roberta's presence. These water women are also often inverted or multiplied, just as they have been while still embodied by the artist and the multiples. Therefore, even when disembodied, these works still maintain the same understanding of subjectivity as pertaining at the same time to its current and formal self, making transcendence an important part of the series. While the series started with collages and photographs of the evaporating and mutating bodies of the different Roberta, in her newest series of works using the image of the water women, these are transitioning back to solidity, as you see here in this image, which is a still from her latest solo exhibition at the New Museum in New York, where these water women here on the left actually are now part of a water purification system, so also part of the newer works. But from the photos, which she was making from the 70s, which you see on the right, they're actually transitioning into more solid presences. Therefore, transcendence between physical states, from imagination into the real world, from photographic documentation to impersonating in real life, and then back to a metaphorical level, are part of this continuous exchange between the artist, the impersonators, and the character, performance and photography, and representation and reality. To conclude, I would like to say that while documentary photography would have traditionally frozen an identity in a specific moment in time, in Roberta Brightmore's case, these validate her identity. It is such an institutionalized construction that she needed to prove her factual existence, meaning that in her case, documentary photography didn't act as an abolisher of subjectivity, but rather an establisher of such. What is supposed to dehumanize actually humanizes her. Just as surveillance, where one was supposed to be controlled, Roberta's actually liberated, kept safe and secure. Roberta Brightmore's documentary photography isn't confined to its frame, but literally and metaphorically evaded in order to bring the character to life. While these works do abide by what performative photography of static images is supposed to do, of activating a new way of dealing with the present, They go beyond this function in a reality-producing effect of a call to action, which enables the viewers to take on the role of Roberta Brightmore themselves, potentially activating an endless loop of Roberta Brightmore enactments in real life. This endless loop is nevertheless brought back to photography, this time as digital photography instead of analog photography, in the form of an ongoing process. The Roberta Brightmore performance, in other words, acted like a stem cell, a logical foundation for Lynn Hershman-Leeson's subsequent work, especially for her work in interactive media. So we stay with the last question then. What happens between performance and photography in Lynn Hershman-Leeson's crossing between the two in this famous performance of Becoming Roberta Brightmore? Photography is used as documentation, but not to metaphorically freeze the character, but rather to fix it into life. Consequently, the character is released from fixity through performative photography, which brings her into the real world, for the character to eventually be taken back into metaphorical existence through photography. Reality is therefore conditioned and constructed through representation, as through her representation, the character becomes real. At the same time, factual documentation actively blurs the line between reality and fiction, making it impossible to draw a firm line between the performed character and artist. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for this very challenging presentation. Thank you. So we now change. Let me introduce you Richard Southern-Smith. He's a photographic artist whose sustained work since 1994 can be described as autobiographical. He constructed and staged performances for the camera, creating multiple personas to articulate the concerns of his practice. He's also professor of fine art and photography at Norwich University of the Arts, UK, and editor of several books and journals. Richard will speak about performing autobiography and memory through stage photographic self-portraits, a process that goes from assemblage to phototherapy. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. And obviously, thank you to the organizing committee for the invitation to speak and to talk, and for arranging such a fascinating and interesting conference. And actually certainly picking up on some of these, like talking about Claude Cahun and Cindy Sherman, that there's sort of references that sit at the back of some of my work there as well, in terms of this photographic practice. In these circumstances, I would normally, as an artist, as a photographer, just kind of talk and ad-lib my way through the slides of my photography. But for today, I wanted to read a section from a larger paper exploring the process and methodology of producing the work in relation to the kind of conference themes. And again, this is actually therefore really in contrast to how the work was made, which was ad-lib. It was kind of made up as it went along. And if in tech terms it works, I plan to just have slides on a timer that will sit in the background as I read. So you've got something to look at. I suppose I have to do one of those warnings. There is male nudity in these slides, particularly of an older male. So some people might find that disturbing. And hopefully that's okay for our audience who are watching us online. So, as a way of background, my photography over the last 30 years can be split into 3 major projects, or personas, as I prefer to call them, each being an umbrella term for a range of small, discrete series of images, although all speaking about my life experience and responding to the world around me. The first, The Damaged Narcissist, 1994 to 2009, represents the early years of HIV diagnosis, very much about coming to terms with and trying to establish an identity and a life in response to the virus and in resistance to becoming the medicalized self. The second, The Anatomical Man, 2009 to 2019, my tattoo, alter ego, where I had images of veins and arteries tattooed onto my body to signify and make visible the constant, repetitive, and intrusive trips to the clinic for blood tests, literally drawing my life onto the skin of my body. The third persona in this trilogy, The Unknowing X 2009 to present, is the one I wish to speak about today, which makes a significant shift in the process of production. With a desire to return to the photography studio to simply do something fun, after an absence of a couple of years working on digital film and virtual reality projects, I found myself reviewing and rewriting the self and my expectations about the future or what the future could hold for me. The methodology in making the new work was a shift away from predetermined outcomes of previous projects to literally not knowing. Not just what the outcomes would be, but even where the starting point would be. This is in contrast with The Anatomical Man, the tattoo persona, for example, where there was an 18-month research period leading up to making the photographs. Even the studio had been pre-arranged so that the progress of the tattoos over weeks and months could be photographed to form a series of images from pre-tattoos to partial to finished in the same setting. The new method of working, I called unknowing, required riding out the fear of not knowing what the outcome of the project would be, at the same time cultivating an environment for experimentation. This process was an attempt to unknow, unlearn, to shut out the past, move on, and not be overshadowed by what had gone before. By trying to move to a place of unknowing, a performative and speculative space of creativity unburdened by criteria, I was perhaps returning to a position of making myself strange to me, an attempt to defy the specific narrative of HIV in previous works. While not knowing and unknowing could appear to be used interchangeably, the preference for unknowing as the title is because, as Rachel Jones, writing in on Not Knowing How Artists Think, comments, Nietzsche reminds us that we are unknown to ourselves, we knowers. For Nietzsche, such unknowing is not simply a lack, a gap, or absence of knowledge to be filled, but a condition of thought and of life, end quote. It is the possibilities of unknowing that reduces the burden of previous histories and memories that was initially the motivation for producing new work. Not knowing establishes, as Jones continues, a condition of becoming, of the possibility of not yet and still to be, without its emergencies being overshadowed by what already is and has been, end quote. On the surface, it might even seem like an anti-epistemological approach in terms of what do we know and how do we know what we know by disregarding what I know. Not, quote, deployed with epistemological ignorance to support and perpetuate unjust social structures, such as those based on sexism and racism, end quote, as Elizabeth Fisher put in the same book, but the complete opposite, to challenge such structures. Although, as Fisher warns, historically, even the knowing subject has traditionally been gendered as male, end quote, within a heteronormative society, it is precisely as the other, unknowing offers the transformative potential of not yet and still to be, and contributes to the production of new knowledge. While unknowing in some respects could be described as a process of unthinking, it becomes thinking through making with the potential to create the unthinkable that wouldn't have been imaginable before. Jones refers to the writing at Irigaray, some 100 years after Nietzsche, about the potential damages of making the strange familiar to ourselves. If it is consumed within or assimilated into the heteronormative condition, rather than if we open up to and learn from the other, end quote. Quote from her was, part of the artistic work of becoming thus lies in remaining open to the strange in its strangeness, being prepared to lose ourselves in the encounter, risking not knowing as a condition of possible transformation. And as Nietzsche reminds us, one of his hardest tasks is to turn to what is most familiar and precisely there, to see as strange, as distant, as outside us. Learning to see as strange makes us at home in the everyday, and thereby restores it as a potential place of marvel, where we might become other than what or who we are, end quote. So it is this very notion of at home that I intuitively responded to the photographer Jason Evans in an earlier interview in a magazine called They Shoot Homos, Don't They? As the uncanny, he went on to remark, sometimes you stand like Richard that's in the pictures. I quite like the fact that there's a two-way discourse between the other you and the you, end quote. I expand on this two-way discourse in the new work by talking to myself over time, to my previous selves condensed into the single image. The unknowing X became about future possibilities to become other than what or who I am by making strange my autobiography. This is the context of a HIV diagnosis at a time before effective antiretroviral therapies were introduced, but nearly 30 years later, as I fast approached my 60th birthday, I'm thinking, what next? What or who can I be? There is at play here what might seem like a contradiction, as it is possible to describe my previous photographic practice as a device to explore a state of disjuncture and a life of not knowing, as if I was searching for clarity because I was living with a virus that could kill me, not knowing how long I would live. Now that the virus is undetectable and can expect a full life, I knowingly situate myself in a place of not knowing, rather than certainty, to imagine what the future could be. The method to establish a space and condition of knowing was for the photography studio to become a giant adult dressing up box of outfits and objects I had amassed over the years, accumulating from different parts of my life, from AIDS patient to university professor, gender bender to porn star, go-go dancer to boxer, drag queen to leather queen, twink to daddy. Playing at dressing up had me performing to the camera, playing at being myself, or more accurately, the different selves and personas inhabited through my life. Rather than trying to peel away layers to search for some notion of an essence or understanding, as I feel I was potentially doing in previous projects. This time I was literally adding layers in a mashup of previous roles. This process established the creation of multiple individual personas and characters or actors based on different parts of my life. The resulting photographs propose the fluidity and temporality to the roles performed and lives lived, from the awkward 18-year-old twink to the mature 59-year-old body fantasized by new twinks as daddy. Dipping into the dressing up box, using these different personas one has performed or been categorized as, collapsing them into a single frame to create a new potential different role, all the time layering and playing with past lives, memories and personal archives, with aging, health, masculinity, gender, sexuality, identity, subjectivity, and everything in between. The theme to the project became playing myself, stroke selves, under the umbrella persona and process of unknowing. In the creation of a playroom to produce the work, the studio come dressing up box also provided a psychological space, enabling a state of mind to facilitate the free-flowing and random connection of thoughts and memories. This process of unknowing, therefore, had unintentional consequences, and what again could be seen as a contradiction, acknowledging the hardest task is to see outside ourselves, to losing oneself in encounter, as it led to a subconscious act of image making. It wasn't until self-reflection and analysis, once the event in the studio and image had been made, that the references became clear. However, as I progressed with the project, I became aware that I was drawing on previous lives lived, my autobiography and memories, the influences that shape my practice and my world, even past traumas, to inform the storytelling of my life through a series of self-portraits, performances for the camera. To this end, as the project continued and developed during isolation and lockdowns due to COVID-19 pandemic, I noticed not just the visual impact of my photography, how materials and objects such as masks and medical memorabilia returned to the series as the new pandemic extended into weeks and months, but the psychological impact also, It was as if the prominence of the viral contagion again rematerialized, but as a different spectre. Coronavirus acting as a trigger, the trauma that HIV never leaves one, finding oneself living through another pandemic, fighting off another virus. In the work, I was becoming haunted by previous lives lived, lives loved, and lives lost. Now witnessing a new language for some of superheroes not afforded to us. The celebration of being vaccinated against the coronavirus, the implications of being healthy and clean in a new context, yet still no vaccination for HIV. In this environment, the work could also be considered as an unintentional form of phototherapy, as I am reminded of the photography produced by artists such as Joe Spence working with Rosie Martin, who helped to define the term phototherapy. A similar process of performing in the studio for the camera, where play can bring subconscious thoughts to the surface. It wasn't planned that the project should explore such issues as a form of phototherapy. As mentioned, the work was a bit of fun, intended as unintentional. Although, as the art historian and cultural critic Simon Watney had previously reminded me on the subject, body image still remains such a fertile area of exploration based on the often hidden psychic reality of the body, a reality created from memories which are often for good reasons repressed. Watney continues that for many of us, HIV reenacts all sorts of dark things about our relationship to our bodies and our desires, end quote. In helping to define and summarize this new process and the properties of the dressing up box, I also turned to colleague and research collaborator Sean Camp, who wrote of the project. On the subject of not knowing, Richard has been navigating through ideas centered upon entering into photographic work with no preconceived plan, with the equivalent of a dressing up box. This plays upon ideas centered upon loose parts, where Nicholson's derived the idea that loose parts, materials, and objects can be moved around, juxtaposed, designed, and redesigned, creating infinite choices and opportunities. The dressing up box represents a collection of loose parts with multiple affordances, where the qualities of properties or of an object defines its possible uses, how it could or should be used. In this sense, the properties are akin to Deleuze's notion of the assemblage, where an assemblage can bring about any number of effects: aesthetic, productive, destructive, consumptive, informative, etc. End quote. So Nicholson's theory of loose parts was intended as a design methodology for the planning and design of environments, in particular looking at how children engage with their environments, with a plea for them to play a part in the design process. Quote, children learn most readily and easily in a laboratory type environment where they can experiment, enjoy, and find out things for themselves, end quote. I'm proposing this experimentation shouldn't be left to children, but taken on to adulthood. For me, the studio stroke dressing up box became the laboratory type environment to play and perform. And as Paul Pesek wrote in his book, Power of Play, it is, quote, probably only in play that we could be truly original creatively. And that's because it's in a play state that the whole personality is expressed. Since our desires below the tide line of consciousness, the person who appears through creative play is the core and authentic one, the real deal, end quote. So performing in the dressing up box with these loose parts or assemblages, the outcomes, I would suggest, are photographically akin to photo montages. Distinct from a simple collage of composite material pasted over a surface, the montage is a single composition. Layering the objects, which are representatives of different parts of my life, disrupt the temporality of my autobiography to a non-linear event. The constituent parts become fluid and unstable, displaced and replaced through the process of play. coming to the fore in different ways, depending on the different affordances of the objects to create new wholes. Entering the process of dressing up with no preconceived plan means entering into a speculative process of design and redesign. The process is precognitive, a process of discovery below the tide line of consciousness, where it is only the emergent outcomes that are rationalized. Kant believes, quote, this echoes Atkinson's notion entering into a process without criteria, where the art event, Atkinson's The Force of Art, participates a kind of becoming, end quote. So with this project, the event, the act, is the process of playing in the dressing up box. And even though the objects have their own histories with associated memories, entering a space of not knowing, a creative process without preconceived criteria, any form of sense making is arrived at after the event rather than before or during. So after the event, where a rationalization of the event, the reading of the event is revealed. Connections, associations, memories are discovered within the work, the new layered montage personas, by both the originator, myself, and those receiving the work. To this end, sense or mean making is becoming as well. Thank you. I read that slightly quicker than in rehearsal. There was a couple of more slides that were coming up. And something I didn't touch on the paper was just how these taking those personas from the studio and actually then using them on things like dating apps. And so using those images and taking them into the virtual life, virtual reality, has some crossover, just taking that staged performance in the studio to external audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, for sharing with us your great work and thoughts and proposals. I'm sure we'll discuss it a lot at the end. Now, please, let's welcome Hayley Morris Cafiero, part performer, part visual artist, part provocateur. I think you already know her. It's an honor to have, great honor to have you here. She uses her photography as an activist voice to fight discrimination and social invisibility. Morris Cafiero's photographs have been widely exhibited in solo and group exhibitions around the world and have been featured in numerous newspapers, magazines, and online, including Le Monde, New York Times, and Salon. Hayley is also a senior lecturer in photography at University of Northampton, UK, although born in the US, where she studied. And she's going to talk about the use of performative photography as an activist tool for depicting the disobedient body. Thank you.
Thank you. Arrow down and up. Right. Wait, which one? Okay. You like touched all the buttons. Okay. All right. Oh, hey. Thank you for the. Okay, is that good? Thank you for the introduction. Thank you to the organizers for this wonderful event. Thank you for watching. I'm going to, in this presentation, I'm going to share 3 series where I employ performative photographic methodologies to subvert various systems used by society to regulate the female body, okay? So the body that is the subject of these photographs is mine, one that Janine Gailey would describe as hyper invisible, meaning marginalized beyond invisible into the scope of criticism and ridicule. So by reversing the weaponization of these tools used by society, I transgress these rules that attempt to control my body and punish me and others for our unaltered bodies. Through highlighting my disobedience and the disobedience of others, I aim to activate the viewer to challenge the rules that govern the female body. Okay, wrong button. I'm sorry, I didn't want to be that person, but you have a very, okay. You have a very sophisticated system. I didn't want to, okay. So I'm going to start with Weight Watchers, which was created from 2010 and 2015. And in the series, I set up a camera in public and I photograph strangers, passersby, while I perform mundane performances. And then I look at the images to see if anybody had a critical or questioning look in their face and their body language, and then I include them in the series. So this is the first image from the series, and at the time I was working on just a series of self-portraits about space and my body, not about other people. So I chose the Times Square steps in New York City, the Coca-Cola steps, and it's because it's surrounded by food, advertising, and photos of beautiful models and underwear, and took the photo. And then when I got the film developed a couple weeks later, I noticed this man, even though we're in the sensory overload capital of the world, he seems to be fixated on me. And I thought, and it happened 5 minutes later in the same roll of film. So I thought, well, what happens if I carry a camera everywhere I go and kind of do these performances? So that's what I did. And the performances, you like it? Yeah. Okay, thanks. The performances are, I call them guerrilla performances because they're meant to not cause a spectacle. So the mundane is, whatever is happening in the scene, and quick. I'll go in 1 minute, no more than a minute, and leave again to not cause a spectacle. So the process of making the images is I set the camera settings, focus and everything, and then I dangle it around someone's neck, an assistant, typically a student paid for food, and then I give them a cue of when to push the shutter. And it's typically when just people are coming, and then move on. And then so I have to say, I don't know what the people in the photographs are thinking or reacting to. It's that moment in time that's isolated, to kind of start a conversation about the gaze, and that kind of, Foucault gaze of how we kind of use the gaze to kind of discipline everyone and keep, within our social rules. So the images were produced all over the world and over a long period of time because I wanted to get a wide range of people. It's not about, men, women, Americans, whatever. And it's kind of, and for, the images, the actual photographs themselves are kind of a hybrid of theatrical and document because the performances are constructed and the scene, everything is composed, but I seize that realistic nature of photography to capture that gaze. And it's really clear, it's really important that as the maker of these images, I present them to the viewer, who then kind of brings their experience to the work to, start the conversation about what's actually happening in the photographs. And then the work was published in a book in 2015 by the Magenta Foundation. So in 2013, 2/3-ish ways through the project, the images were published on Linscratch, which is a great photo blog. And then the next day, Huffington Post, and then the next day, Daily Mail UK, and then it went super viral for 2 years. Waves and waves and waves of viral. And so this is like a chart I like to use to show what viral looks like, because even though it's just 2 points in a line, they, when the little right before those high points, I was being contacted by dozens of news organizations to do television interviews, radio interviews, media interviews, on and off for 2 years. And this was great because these images were made for a gallery. I'm a fine art trained photographer and artist. And so the good thing is that the viewership was over 300 million people that would never come to a gallery. And then things like this is 300 million. Yeah. Yeah. This is like Nora O'Donnell, who is a really, she's a feminist news presenter in America, and I worshiped her. And then she talked about my work. So I was like, bucket list, I'm done now. But then there's the not so positive side of going viral. So I can tell you that I knew Huffington Post was going to publish that day, but I didn't know what time. And I get an email from somebody that says, you're fat and disgusting, and you're gonna die because you are so fat and disgusting. And my first thought was, oh, Huffington Post must have published. And then my second thought was to bust out in laughter and just be amused by this person. And I wasn't amused that they were spreading hate, right? But I was amused at literally the waste of calories and energy that they took to mail me something I don't care about to try to stop me. So over the 2 years, and actually up until 2 months ago, I got another hate mail. All of these messages and blogs and change.org petitions that tried to stop me, they amused me. So I started saving these comments, and I saved over 8,000 of them because I knew I wanted to respond. Because again, these comments are that kind of new Foucault gaze of trying to basically regulate me and people to stop, just to hide and be silent. And so in thinking of how I wanted to respond to them, I thought about, well, if I responded in text, they would delete it, or it would fuel more chains of comments. But an image can never be removed from the internet. No amount of power or money can truly remove an image from the internet, which is handy because I could respond with a photograph. And then secondly, if you look at the profiles of these people, these bullies, they're very perfectly curated, and they always feature the trendy, love, peace thing that's going on. But they're using those same profiles to attack me and others. There's nothing special about me. I was just in front of them that day. They're just probably doing this to millions and millions of other people. So I decided to use their profile photos. So the response to the bullies is called the Bully Pulpit, where I found 25 profiles of the bullies, and I costume myself to look like them, and I insert their hateful message into the frame, thus tattooing it to their identity forever, and eventually publishing it on the internet to make sure they never go away. Okay, this response will never be deleted. And so, for example, if you can't read that, you're fat and gross, your arms make me want to puke. Okay. This one, I don't get why women allow themselves to get fat. You'll be treated like shit. So some of the images are facsimiles of their profiles, like this one. Like he's like, all of the images have the bully's wig, have facial hair. If they're wearing solid colored clothes, I printed the text on the clothes, so forth. And he was wearing, I found a Barco lounger, the chair, the whole full thing. No, because they actually, so I could have put their photographs out there and with their name and say, look what this person did to me. But A, that would have only lasted 15 seconds. And B, the person who took the photograph has more power and control than the person in it. So I would have had to deal with that. But you actually have zero control over your likeness. I can make a perfect facsimile of your face and use it, and you can't do anything about it. So I didn't want to do a perfect facsimile because of humor, which I'll talk about in a minute. But, they look just like their profile photos in a lot of sense. So how do I work? Well, here's a typical comment. Why don't you just say no to food and try a little exercise? Okay. And it was said by this person. And You know, and so the way, I mean, each of these is highly crafted in terms of the way they're produced. I found the location where it was taken. I mapped out how to get there. I knew exactly where to take the picture. And I thought, well, what would be the point of that in that one? And I was like, well, I do have his Speedo. I found his Speedo. So I can use that Speedo. And, you know, so there we go. So buy the Speedo, print his text. There we go. Because that image is a lot better looking than his profile. I mean, you know, I am an artist, you know, I got to do some stuff, you know, can't always replicate because they're not good. So going to humor is another tool that society uses to marginalize people. Anyone who we don't want to take seriously is a subject of jokes, right? So I reverse that back onto the bullies by using really low quality prosthetics and wigs and you know, again, to make them the subject of the joke. So hopefully they will go away. So here's an example, you know, to answer your question of their actual image. So in this image, I picked people that I could use really specific visual cues. So like if she's scrolling through the internet and she sees that is all of her tattoos that I made as inkjet tattoos. And the top, that one right there is I found out a zombie apocalypse symbol over a really bad spider web. And I don't think that tattoo exists anywhere else. So, and then I put her text on as tattoos because that clearly means a lot to her. And here's the thing is that if they identify themselves, if they say, how dare you do this to me? You identified yourself. I didn't give your name. I didn't give your location, even though I have all that information. Somebody tried to hide themselves with a cartoon dogs as their profile photo. And I Googled his name. And now when we're talking like looking for their profile, this is me with 5 minutes on Google, right? This is not private investigator. I Googled his name. I found that he was arrested. And then within 5 minutes, I called the jail, got a copy of his mugshot, and that's what's used in the series. So the internet's not going to protect you. So the age range, and I'll read this is fat shaming is a thing because they are the weaker of society, only human to treat them worse. The age range in this case is 13 all the way to 70. And when you see an image that has like an iconic photo in it or iconic image on the shirt, that was actually what they were wearing. So again, the performances in this series is meant, so I studied each bully's profile and to get their mannerisms and really kind of build a persona. And the performances are meant to kind of give authenticity for my, becoming that bully for that moment in time. And then, again, I picked the 25 people with the widest range of kind of bullying comments. Like this woman tried to start a campaign that Weight Watchers was photoshopped. But she has one of those profiles where it's clear that she is manipulating her body. So I wanted to send her that message back. So the third series, this is, new, never before seen, is basically the other people that contacted me from Weight Watchers were really inspired. And, I got thousands of messages, grateful. Most of them were like really short, thank you, you go girl, really short things, but some of them were really detailed personal stories about how they experienced something horrible in their life and seeing Weight Watchers help them overcome it. So we're talking someone who hadn't left the house in 20 years and saw Weight Watchers and felt the confidence to leave, someone in the process of committing suicide, someone who finally was able to leave an abusive relationship. I mean, really deep personal stuff that they're sending to a stranger. So those kind of, another kind of phenomenon of the internet, I wanted to honor those relationships, this relationship a little bit more. So I collaborated with 25 of the inspired ones to basically find out more information about where they saw Weight Watchers, how they saw it, what inspires them, what colors, what patterns, bring them joy. And I used that information to create performances underwater. So the wigs in each of these is their hairstyle. but the costumes and the performance that I'm doing is based on their stories. It's really important that they have agency in this, in this image. And so underwater, to again kind of seize that trope of mad woman underwater Ophelia trope that is beautiful at the same time, taking that and putting a body that should not be graceful, a body that should not be beautiful and should not be allowed to move like that, but can, making the underwater space, transcendent. These are people who are empowered. And so the performances are meant to kind of show that transcendence. And so all of the props, all of the costumes are kind of inspired and iterations of their stories. So I think this is the last one. Oh, no, last one, military maneuver. Yep. Someone who was not allowed to join the American Army because they were too overweight, triggered 30 years of body hate. So I did an army maneuver for them. But thank you.
Go away. Thank you.
My little card's down there. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Haley, and all the Haleys who came to be shared with us. It was amazing. So we have like 5 minutes. We'll extend it a little bit, but please be quick and with your ideas. I don't know who wants to start. Yes.
Hi. Oh, okay, good. I thank you, everybody. That was an amazing pairing for all three of you. And I think all three of you said this word, but maybe not Richard, I didn't catch, transcendence. And so I just wanted to ask you guys to discuss quickly, I guess.
Well, I'm not sure how much I could say because I didn't say the word.
Oh,
So
sorry.
if you did, but
Well,
I can think about it.
Sorry. I think for me, it was important that, because I immediately did the bullies because they made me mad. I'll be, G-rated. They made me very mad. So I wanted to go after the bullies first. And so the inspired people, this empowerment and the collaboration, that was the first time I ever worked collaboratively. And so it was really important to highlight without detail, with protecting the stories and the individuals, of these stories, but to show the transcendence and the empowerment that they got, and they tried to describe to me over email, the stranger in the void. So that's kind of how it fits me in terms of that.
Yeah, I think in Lynn's work as well, transcendence was important. I did mention the word quite a few times, and it's transcendence on very many levels. First, exactly what she was also talking about feminine art history and what's the role of women. So basically, Roberta was trying to transcend a story that was given because she was a young divorcee in the 70s in San Francisco, coming basically to San Francisco to make up a new life. So that was the whole point of it. Lynn herself was a divorcee at the time. So this character was supposed to transcend the limits that society was imposing on women in the 70s in San Francisco. But unfortunately, she realizes throughout the performance that it's not that easy to get out of that role that's attributed to women. So then that's why transcendence goes on to a next level, and she actually tries to bring it out. That's why everyone can become her. So she can transcend from one person to multiple people trying to get out of the story, not only in one given point in time in history, but actually throughout art history, throughout history, and even today.
Okay, next. Yeah. Okay.
Is it working?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a question for Hayley. Thank you. I mean, all three great presentations. Thank you. I was interested to ask whether anything shifted or changed for you through moving from working in America to working in the UK in relation to the body and the pieces you make.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's a great question. No, I think I think when so I moved to the UK about 4 years ago, and I think because my experience was so global, I actually don't really I only did a few Weight Watchers in Memphis. Like there's 60 in this series total, and there's 22 that I like to, or 25 that I like to exhibit. But in terms of it's almost like I wouldn't do it anywhere. I don't know. UK, I never did it when I was Weight Watchers when I was traveling. And I think in terms of how, if anything, being in the UK, it was, kind of the pandemic of how to connect and how to connect to somebody and how to really make a meaningful engagement. But I don't think that was UK. I think that was just, global. But other than that, no. But it's an excellent question. Like I tried, but no.
Thank you. Next. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Hi, this is a question for Richard in particular, but maybe also for the other two, you can decide. Because your presentation made me think back of the Ulay presentation in the last panel. Hello.
I think you have to hit it at the bottom. It seems to work. Yeah. No, good. Maybe it's your magic. You got the magic.
Can you work here?
Every time he hits it, it starts working. Well, if you want to say it, we can repeat it. I don't know. That helps.
Go for it. So the question is about connects to the last panel where someone was doing photography to find himself, and with Richard, it might be the opposite way.
Well, thank you for the question. It's an interesting observation. There's other elements of looking at work where I talk about kind of peeling off the layers or adding layers, and there's this sense of you're trying to get to some kind of essence, and I think that there was a process of doing that when one was first diagnosed HIV positive, because your whole life is kind of thrown up in the air, and there was a search perhaps in the early work to try and make sense of this and to come to terms with it. And I think just through that process of doing it, understanding actually this sense of trying to find an essence of the body was actually just creating another layer and another layer. So I just feel the work has kind of built up on that, and just in terms of actually, are we ever going to discover this true essence of ourselves? But on the other hand, though, contradicting myself is like saying, well, actually, it's now because of having a normal full life expectancy, is all that works just on, well, what could the new identities be? Who could I become? What could I play? So it's you know, it's performative identities or whatever, or new identities, or just changing it. So there's a kind of mixture there from just that previous sense of searching for oneself and thinking, well, you're never really going to get there, to just then creating, having fun with it. And it's something I meant to say at the start of the talk was like, these are all kind of just fun. The whole project was about fun doing it. So if people wanted to snigger, or well, not necessarily snigger, but laugh at the work and enjoy the work, you know, that was acceptable as well. And I'm not sure if that really answers your question, but it isn't necessarily about trying to find a fixed identity. And I think that when you look back at your life, you just see these multiple identities and you recognize how much you've changed. And that's part of it, this idea of being an insecure, awkward 18-year-old. And then as you go through your life, your body changes, your personality could change, the rest of it, there's different stages of life, you're a different person. And so that final work is kind of bringing all those things together.
It also relates to the last question of transcending, right? And it's interesting, the three artists mentioned here have bodies that cry, saying, I'm here, either be it breathing problems or virus or weight. And so in a way, it's not for the before the transcending is this affirmation of the body, and then what you do about it. So please. What kind of work? So the question is about an imagined medical body, because Richard drew a medical body, but out of place, with veins displaced and things.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, interesting question. That one of the things with having the tattoos done and where they were placed is that particularly the veins and arteries come from medical drawings from the 1850s, and it felt there was a time when this shifting from still the drawing of the body to then photographing the body, as photography was becoming more readily available at that point. But it was part of that was playing my mind about, it doesn't have to be kind of accurate. I'm not trying to represent the real. It's imagining, but also at the same time, it was trying to question the perceived authority, medical authority or scientific authority. And if you went back in time and looked at some of the early kind of anatomical drawings, they weren't made from cadavers. It might have been made from animals. You know, there was a bit of fiction that went on with some of this. But also it relates to, with HIV being such a new virus, you know, that people didn't really understand. And then you had activists and trying to get access to appropriate medication and drugs and stuff. And you quite often found that the gay, the queer community, that patients had as much or more knowledge than some of the doctors did. And just recently, they wanted to change my medication for various reasons, but they were very consultative about it. And the doctor was saying, oh, well, if you go to this website, which is a kind of website that is reviews of the drugs and also kind of a patient-led website. And I felt even today, there was a kind of, I wasn't sure how much in other illnesses or disease where the doctor would say, oh, if you want more information, go and find it out here. Because normally it's like, well, I'm the doctor, this is what's wrong with you. And it seemed to be that had progressed, that even today, that dialogue between where authority in terms of knowledge about the medical, in terms of the virus was. And so a lot of the earlier work, the damaged narcissist played with that. And again, then where the tattoos are and where they're placed is that it wasn't supposed to be accurate, but actually it questions where is the perceived knowledge in terms of the medicine and science related to this and to the body. And that am I not myself know my body perhaps better than somebody else? And it's for me to make those decisions, you know. And also a little bit referred back to Jo Spence. I remember her, you know, kind of, you know, leaving hospital and looking for, she said that it's funny, there are wards for cancer or for this, that, and the other in hospital, but there are no wards for the whole body. And she wanted to take that holistic approach to how she felt about her body and how she healed herself. And which she found in kind of Chinese herbal medicine, but that kind of was just in my background as well, in terms of extending that debate beyond the kind of singular things in terms of a power knowledge relationship that goes on between authority and individuals.
We have to finish, I'm afraid. Can you do it quickly? Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Basically, was this work the first time we turned the bodies on ourselves? Yeah. For me, no. I had an eating disorder as a teenager, and like incredibly over exercised, minimal eating. And the second I stopped, because I felt awful, like I just felt awful, I stopped, I gained like tons of weight. And so from that point on, like my body kind of became this like autobiographical tool to communicate how I was feeling. And a lot of the things and using the repetition of my body over the years has kind of made it, you know, anybody who feels, you know, marginalized can fit into that. But it's a tool I've been using since you know, grad school and earlier. I think for me, it's very like when I'm doing the work, it's very clinical. It's very like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and it's X, Y, Z, done, you know, type thing. It's not like, oh, you know, how do I look? It's just, I'm going to get the job done. So.
And again, similar, just quickly, I mean, I think as a photographic artist, I was using myself a lot in the work prior to the diagnosis. It was one of the first things I did do. After I had the diagnosis, I went to my studio and did a portrait of myself. And I kind of got a big kind of sketchbook and put the picture in there and said, right, this is number one. And then what's going to happen after that? I also then enrolled in my MA in photographic studies, knowing that I was going to explore this as an issue. But I had been doing kind of self-portraits before. And part of that, it was easier to use myself in images. I realized quite early on when I was photographing other people, I wasn't really photographing them or taking their portraits, but I was photographing the ideas and concepts I had. And they were a convenient tool to use. But it was always easier to use yourself because you turned up on time, you did anything the photographer said do, however embarrassing or stupid it was. So it was part of an extended practice, I guess.
Okay. Timea,
Yeah, and then just to end on the same note, of course, I was not talking about my work, but about someone else, but someone who I actually know very well and I work with. So we have a lot of interviews. We've done a lot of interviews, so I know the backstory, but it's also quite officially on the record through other work that she does. And indeed, yes, her work also comes from, in a way, has an abusive childhood. And as a child, she used to make up alternative identities to kind of cope with that. And then once she became, well, an artist, she started also using that. And it really appears in a lot of parts of her work. And actually, the most interesting one in this topic is her diary series. So actually, she really did this confessional kind of work. Like she would record in front of a camera. She would speak as to a therapist. So she would just keep saying things of her life. But just as in Roberta Bright Mordecai, there's a thin line between reality and fiction, because she would say things which weren't actually true, but she would say things like the abuse that I told you, which is also there, but it's a mixture of information. So it's really the confessional tape of what is now very popular. She started it in the 80s, 90s, there was a large gap, and then she did another one for her retrospective that I mentioned. But it stems shortly from something personal, which of course in the artistic practice keeps on changing, developing, and going to different stages.
So thank you all for this great panel. I'm not here to entertain. It's the title of the performance showing next at 2:20. And we will meet at the hall downstairs here where the catering is, okay? See you. Bye-bye.